Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Sitting in a Car. I am Sarah Sproul, and I sit in a car and answer questions that parents have about how to talk about sex, relationships, and consent with their kids. So, a few weeks ago, I was at a primary school somewhere in Ireland, and when I'm talking to kids in their classroom, I get them to write questions on post-it notes. It's easier for them to ask me the questions they need to without feeling embarrassed in front of their classmates. And I wanted to talk about this question on sitting in a car. Why do girls have a period? Why couldn't we just grow? I wanted to talk about the thinking behind this question because I think it's important for us parents to understand why talking as early as we possibly can about puberty and bodies and all those things are useful for young people as they approach puberty. This question, why do girls have to have a period? Why couldn't they just grow? Behind that question, there feels like there's a sort of like a frustration or a fear maybe, or a sort of a feeling of heaviness. Why do we have to do this? It's not fair. It's hard work. Why would we have to do that? And that's not surprising if you have just been living your child life and not really thinking about what our bodies do, how we create new human beings to come into the world. So if conversations about periods are starting when our young person is starting to go through puberty, not only are they having to deal with all the complexity of their bodies changing and the emotional and psychological changes that are happening there, but they're also having to deal with this new burden, in a sense. And what I notice is for young children who grow up understanding that getting a period is part of our development, there's less about that sense of burden and fear maybe, and more about just like, oh, this is the next thing. This is what's going to happen next. And a sort of an understanding that it's normal. And if the conversations have been going on since very young, then there is an openness with their caring adults, and there is a sense of sort of being on their own and having to deal with this big thing. I want to add some of the other questions, period-related questions that I got in this school. So remember, these kids are 11 and 12. This was a 5th and a 6th class, just so you get an idea of some of the things your kid might be thinking, particularly if they're a tween. Can you go to the toilet if you're using a tampon? So that is a question about anatomy. So, if we're looking at the anatomy of the penis, where they have a urethra where the urine will pass out as well as where the semen passes out, then even though I have gone through the anatomy, with this class, it's important to say that in people with a vulva, the urethra is separate and that just does the urine, and the vagina is where the menstrual blood passes out and where the tampon is. So talking about very basic things like that is useful for our kid, because remember, they know nothing. They know nothing unless they've been given a book, and even then, still they can misunderstand some of the information. Talking things through is really important. The question like, how old are you when you start your period? A lot of kids are worried about, are they normal because it hasn't started yet, or are they normal because it already did start and no one else in their class has it? So that is a fear we can put to rest by talking about all the different normals and how it's possible to have your period at 8, how it's possible to have your period at 14 or 15. Here's another question: why do we get periods so young? And in that, again, is this sort of idea of, I think, something that would be going through this person's mind would be, I feel too young to deal with this. Why do I have to deal with this now? I'm still a kid. And again, those sort of feelings we can help to minimize if we start talking about periods early, and we start talking about how they are a normal part of being human, and describe how when we get our period, if you're a person that has a period, when you get your period, and you can say to your kid, oh, I got my period today, so this is how I'm going to manage it. And we start teaching them that periods happen all the time, and a lot of people cope with them really well, and they will be able to cope with them too. It's just a bit of modeling. Using these questions that I get from the classroom, I'm really hoping to demonstrate to you how useful it is as parents if we can start normalizing conversations to do with our kids' bodies and reproduction and puberty, because the earlier we talk about these things, the more ingrained they get into our young person's head, the more normal they become. Our young person is able to have back and forth conversations with us about these things. And hopefully then your kid, if they ever sit in a classroom with me, will not be the one that writes these post-it note questions that have a background of fear and a feeling of being unsure. And that's Sitting in a Car for another week, where I've answered a question to help you raise confident and caring kids who respect themselves and the people around them. Bye for now.